If you were born before 1990 and you've never personally checked your Social Security earnings record, there's a real chance the government has the wrong numbers on file for you, and you won't find out until your first check is smaller than it should be. Here quotes why this matters. Social Security doesn't just add up everything you ever earned, it uses your highest 35 years of earnings to calculate your monthly check. If even one of those years is missing or wrong in their system, that year gets counted as a zero. And here's the part almost nobody knows, the law only gives you about 3 years and 3 months to fix a mistake after it happens. After that window closes, the record is legally locked in, for life. Today I'm going to show you exactly what to check, how to fix it if something's wrong, and why 2025 made this more urgent than ever. Most retirement planning conversations focus on the fun stuff, when to claim, how to coordinate with a spouse, how to stretch your savings. But there's a quieter, less glamorous step that comes before all of that, making sure the Social Security Administration actually has an accurate record of what you earned. This record lives in something called the Master Earnings File. It's the mathematical foundation of your entire benefit. SSA takes your highest 35 years of indexed earnings and uses that average to calculate your primary insurance amount, the number your monthly check is built on. If a single year in that file is wrong, missing, or credited to the wrong person, your check can be permanently smaller. Not adjusted later. Not caught automatically. Permanently smaller. Here's where it gets specific for your situation. This isn't a rare glitch that happens to a handful of people. According to a validation study from the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College, there's a real, measurable gap between what people actually earned and what shows up in the administrative record. The average measurement error was about 5.9% for men and 6.7% for women, when comparing survey-reported earnings against W-2 records on file. And this error wasn't random, it was worse for lower-wage workers, meaning the people who can least afford a reduced check are often the ones most likely to have an inaccurate one. This also affects anyone who's changed their name through marriage or divorce without formally updating SSA. It affects people whose employer made a payroll reporting error that got kicked into what's called the earnings suspense file instead of being credited to their record. And it affects retirees broadly. SSA reported over $71.8 billion in improper payments agency-wide in fiscal year 2023, much of it tied to earnings data problems, unreported income or processing errors. Now here's the part most people miss, and it's the single most important fact in this video. Under Section 205(c) of the Social Security Act, you have a strict window to correct an error in your earnings record. 3 years, 3 months, and 15 days from the end of the tax year in which the wages were paid. Once that window closes, the record is presumed legally correct, and SSA is not required to fix it. That means if you're 62 and you discover a mistake from when you were 40, in most cases it's simply too late. But there are exceptions, and this is the open loop worth waiting for. There are 4 specific situations where SSA can still correct your record no matter how much time has passed. I'll walk through exactly what they are in a moment, because knowing them could be the difference between a full correction and a permanently reduced check. First, though, let's talk about why this window has become even more important to watch in 2025. SSA has been overhauling its digital security system. On June 7, 2025, the agency deactivated every legacy, My Social Security, username, and password that was created before September 18, 2021. That affected roughly 46 million account holders, who were forced to move over to either Login.gov or ID.me to keep accessing their account. On top of that, since April 14, 2025, anyone applying for retirement, survivor, or auxiliary benefits who can't or won't use a Login.gov or ID.me account now has to complete identity verification in person at a field office. Medicare and disability claims are exempt from this rule. But retirement and survivor claims are not. But here's what many people miss. The biggest mistake isn't making an error, it's assuming someone else will catch it. Employers and government databases don't automatically flag a mismatch. If your name changed, if an EIN was entered wrong, or if a payroll file failed a technical formatting check, those wages can quietly disappear into the earnings suspense file instead of landing on your record, and nothing alerts you. The second common mistake is waiting until you actually apply for retirement to look at your record for the first time. If you find a problem at that point, correcting it can delay your very first monthly payment by months, because the investigation and the benefit application end up competing for the same review process. The third mistake is not setting up a Login.gov or I.me account early. If you wait, and then need to make a claim or a direct deposit change without one, you may be required to visit a field office in person, and SSA's operational backlogs mean that trip can take a while to schedule and complete. So let's resolve that open loop. If you do find an error, and you're outside the standard correction window, SSA can still fix your record under 4 exceptions. 1. If your record can be matched to a certified tax return, like a Form 1040, that you filed with the IRS for that year. 2. If an employer completely failed to report your wages, but you can prove you worked during that time. 3. If there's an obvious clerical or processing error visible in SSA's own internal systems. 4. If your wages were simply credited to the wrong person or the wrong year. They can be reallocated, regardless of how much time has passed. Here's your practical checklist. Log into your Social Security account and pull your statement of earnings. SSA recommends doing this annually, ideally in August, comparing every year against your actual tax documents, not just skimming for anything that looks obviously off. Gather and preserve your long-term paperwork, W-2 forms, tax returns, and end-of-year pay stubs. If you ever need to prove a correction under one of those 4 exceptions, this is the evidence that makes or breaks your case. If you find a discrepancy, the form you need is SSA-7008, the Request for Correction of Earnings Record. You'll need to provide employer details, the EIN, address, and your exact dates of employment. If primary documents like a W-2 aren't available, SSA also accepts secondary evidence, consecutive pay stubs, bank statements showing consistent direct deposits, timesheets, or union records. One detail worth noting on that form, you'll be asked whether you authorize SSA to contact your employer directly during the investigation. Declining that can make it harder for SSA to resolve the case if your paperwork is incomplete. Once submitted, corrections typically take 10 to 90 days, though more complicated cases, like a business that no longer exists, can take longer. The clear advice here is to resolve any earnings dispute through this process before you formally file for retirement, not at the same time. And separately from all of this, if you haven't already, set up your Login.gov or ID.me credential now, well before you plan to claim. It's a 5-minute task today that can save you a field office visit later. One more thing worth knowing, especially if you're already receiving benefits. If SSA later discovers an overpayment tied to an earnings discrepancy, the rules changed in 2025 too. For overpayments identified after April 25, 2025, SSA can withhold up to 50% of your monthly check, if the issue isn't resolved within 30 days. If that happens to you, you can file a formal request for reconsideration within 60 days of the notice to pause the withholding while it's reviewed. But, if the underlying error is decades old and past the correction deadline, proving your case gets much harder, which is exactly why catching this early matters so much. To put it simply, your Social Security check is only as accurate as the earnings record behind it, and the law only gives you a few years to fix a mistake once it happens. The good news is that checking your record takes just a few minutes, and if something is wrong, there's a clear process, and in some cases, exceptions, to get it corrected. Do this now, while you still have time and options, rather than discovering a problem the day you sit down to file. Checking your earnings record is only half the picture, the other half is understanding exactly how those 35 years get turned into your monthly check, and what claiming age does to that number. If you're not sure how your own timing affects your benefit, that's the next thing worth understanding before you file.